We begin today the Gemara on Daf Tes Vav Amud Aleph, 9 lines down from the top of the Amud, where it says Omar Mar. The Gemara before brought the Braise that speaks about Teira, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim, and who exactly wrote all the different sections of Teira, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. So Omar Mar, it said before in the Braise, Yeshua Kosav Sifroi, Ushmainis Psukim Shebet Yeshua wrote his Sefer, Yeshua, and also the last 8 Psukim of Teira, where it begins with Vayomas Moshe, that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, Yeshua wrote that as well. Says the Gemara Tanya, Commander Omar, we learned here in this Braise, according to the opinion that says that Shmoine Psukim Shebetayre Yeshua Kosvan, that the last 8 Psukim, Yeshua wrote them, because it's actually a machlokes. The Tanya, we learned in another Braise, Vayomas Sham Moshe Eved Hashem. Pasuk says Moshe Rabbeinu Eved Hashem passed away. So Efsher Moshe Meis V'Kosav Vayomas Sham Moshe. Is it possible that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away and he's writing Vayom Hashem Moshe? Or in another place, the Gemara says here, if you Chai, could you say that Moshe Rabbeinu, while he's still alive, and he's writing this, he's writing that he passed away, and he's writing when he's still alive, so what he's writing is not even true. Elo, so therefore this opinion says, Atkan Kosef Moshe, until this pasuk Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, Mikan ve'elech, the rest of the psukim, Kosef Yeshua. Yeshua wrote it, like it said before in this Braise. Divrei Rab Yeshua or Rab Yehuda. Divrei Rab Yehuda. This is Rab Yehuda's opinion. And V'amri lo Rab Nechemia. Others say this is Rab Nechemia's opinion. Amalei Rab Shimon. So Rab Shimon answers and argues and says, can't be, because Efsher Sefer Torah Chaser Ois Achas. Can you say that by Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah was even missing just one letter? Uksiv, and the pasuk says the Eibusha tells Moshe Rabbeinu Lo Koyach as Sefer HaTorah Hazeh. Take this Sefer Torah, and this will be placed on the side of the Aron. But it says Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Sefer Torah complete. So Elo, therefore Rab Shimon says, Atkan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer, until this pasuk, the Eibusha says, U'Moshe Omer v'Kaisef, what the Bach says, takes out the word Omer. Moshe Rabbeinu writes what the Eibusha tells him to write. Mikan ve'elech, after here, from Vayomas Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer, the Eibishter says, Moshe Kaisev B'dema. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote with tears. Kamoshenema, as the pasuk says, Kamoshenema lahalon, and this Kamoshenema lahalon is actually going back on the general lineage here, that Moshe Rabbeinu writes what the Eibishter says, Vayemelem Baruch mipiv, that Baruch, that he heard the nevuah from Yirmiyah, and he said from his mouth, Yikra Elai es kol advarim eile, from his mouth, from the mouth of Yirmiyah, I read and I hear all these things. And I wrote down what he told me on the Sefer with ink. So Moshe Rabbeinu heard everything from the Eibishter and wrote it down in the Sefer Torah. But regarding these last 8 psukim, according to Rab Shimon, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it with tears. So the Maharsha here says that the significance of the fact that he wrote it with tears is because the question was, how could Moshe Rabbeinu write something that didn't happen yet? If he's writing it when he's still alive and he's writing Vayomas Moshe, so it's not true. So therefore, the Gemara says that he wrote it with tears. That when you write something with ink, so then it's permanent. It's there, and you could see the words. When you write something with tears, so you write it on paper. He actually wrote with tears, and therefore it doesn't remain. The writing gets erased. You don't see it. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu did not want to write it with actual ink because it didn't happen yet. He didn't pass away yet. So therefore, he wrote it with tears, which is not a real ksiva. It doesn't remain. It doesn't hold. The Rebbe brings this in also in a letter regarding the question that's asked in Mefarshim, because in another place it says that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away Shabbos afternoon. And if that's the case, how could Moshe Rabbeinu write the Sefer Torah on Shabbos afternoon? So one of the things that it says is that he only wrote the completion of the Torah, the last 8 psukim, and he wrote it with tears, which is not a real writing. When you write it, it erases. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was able to write it on Shabbos. That's one of the things that Mefarshim say about this. Everybody brings in a letter. We're on Daf Tezvav, next page over. Okay. Command, the Gemara continues. Over here inside the Gemara. Second. Command Ozla Ha Da Omer Rav Yeshua Bar Abba Omer Rav Gidl Omer Rav. According to who does it go at this point that Rav Yeshua Bar Abba said, Rav Gidl said the name of Rav. Shmeine Psukim Shebetayra. These last psukim, 8 psukim of the Torah, Yachid Kaira Aisan. One person should get as one aliyah. You should read it all together as one. Don't make any interruptions between them. So why is there an inyan not to make any break in these last 8 psukim? Leime, shall we say Rabbi Yehuda? This is following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, because since Rabbi Yehuda says that these last 8 psukim are different than the rest of Torah, it was written separately, Yeshua wrote them, so therefore that's the reason why we separate between these psukim, you read it all together. Like Rab Shimon, and not like Rab Shimon, that the last 8 psukim of Torah are no different than any other psukim in Torah that were written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Gemara, no, Afil Taim Rab Shimon. This that it says that you should read the last 8 psukim together can follow even Rab Shimon's opinion. Hoyel ve'ishtanu ishtanu. Since it was different, since it was written with Moshe Rabbeinu, he wrote it, but he wrote it with tears. So because it was written differently than the rest of Torah, so therefore you should read it together without any breaks between them. Okay, now going back to what it said before regarding Yeshua. Yeshua Kosav Sifrei. Yeshua wrote his sefer of Yeshua. So the question is, but in Yeshua it says towards the end, V'hoksiv Vayamas Yeshua Benun Eved Hashem, similar to what we're asking regarding the Torah, that it says in Vayamas Moshe, in Sefer Yeshua it also says Vayamas Yeshua Benun. Did Yeshua himself write that? So the Gemara answers, no, the Aske Elazar. Elazar completed and he wrote Vayamas Yeshua. But then later on it says Elazar ben Arames, that Elazar ben Aram also passed away. So who wrote that? Answers the Gemara, the Aske Pinchas. Pinchas completed it and he wrote about the passing of Elazar ben Aram. Now, Braise, going back to what it said before, said Shmuel Kosav Sifrei. Shmuel wrote his sefer, the sefer of Shmuel. But the question is there as well. In the end of Shmuel, V'aksiv, it says Ushmuel Meis, that Shmuel passed away. Who wrote that pasuk that Shmuel passed away? If we're saying that Shmuel wrote the whole sefer, so the answer is the Aske God HaChayze v'Nasan HaNavi. God HaChayze, God, he was a seer, a Navi, and also Nasan HaNavi. They completed the sefer of Shmuel. Then it said before, David Kosav Sefer Tehillim. David wrote Sefer Tehillim, and it added that it was Al Yidei Asara Zakenim, that there are kapitlach of Tehillim that David recorded that he took from 10 Zakenim. And it said, we had before the list in the Braise that went through who these 10 Zakenim were. And it said there that it was Avram Avinu and the Moshe Rabbeinu and so on, different Zakenim, different individuals. The question on this is, V'lachshiv nami Eson Azrachi. Why don't we count this kapitel Tehillim where it says Eson HaEzrachi? So if you just translate it, it sounds like that there was an individual by the name of Eson. There was Ezrachi, and it's a kapitel. He was one of the Zakenim, so it's not counted in the Braise. Omar Rav, so Rav says, who's Eson HaEzrachi? Eson HaEzrachi is Zeu Avram. This refers actually to Avram Avinu, which was the first that was mentioned in the Braise from the 10 Zakenim. How do we know it's Avram? Because Ksiv Hacha Eson HaEzrachi. Here it says this expression that who is it? Eson HaEzrachi. And Ksiv Hasam, it says there about Avram Avinu that mi Heyer mi Mizrach Tzedek v'Gomer, who came and shined from the east, and Mizrach Tzedek. So when it says here Eson, the one that is strong, and is Ezrachi. Ezrachi here means that he came from Mizrach, from the east, and that refers to Avram Avinu that was mi Mizrach. Now, going back to what the Braise said, who was from the 10 Zakenim that David HaMelech wrote down their what they sang, the kapitel of Tehillim, Kochoshev Moshe. So he mentions the kapitel of Tehillim, Tefillah Moshe, and the Kochoshev Haman, and he also counts separately Maskin LeHaman Azrachi, that Haman was another one of the 10 Zakenim. But the question is, aren't they the same individual? V'ha'amar Rav Haman Zeh Moshe. Who was this individual Haman? This is Moshe Rabbeinu. How do we know? And what's the reason why he's called Haman? Ksiv Hacha. Here it says in Tehillim Haman. And it says also, Ksiv Hasam B'chol Beisi Nemanhu. That in my house, the Eibishter says, Moshe Rabbeinu is trusted. So the term Haman that it says in the Pasuk, actually another pasuk where it says the term of Haman, Vayachka Mikol Adam Meison Azrachi veHaman. So this term of Haman that it says refers to Moshe Rabbeinu, which means that he's trusted by the Eibishter. So it's not two separate individuals. Why is the Braise account Moshe and then Haman? And says the Gemara, Trei Haman Havel. True, Moshe Rabbeinu has the name of Haman, but there was still another individual that had the name of Haman. Then it said in the Braise regarding the Sefer Torah, Moshe Kosav Sifroi, Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that wrote his sefer. Not sure why the Gemara brings this here later in the Braise. It started off with this. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote his sefer, in other words, Chamisha Chumshe Torah, Uparshas Bilam. He also wrote the Parsha of Bilam, which is in the Chumash, and also the Eiv. Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that wrote the sefer of Eiv. So here the Gemara is going to get into a long discussion about this personality, Eiv. Who was he? In what time period was he? Was he a Yid? Was he not a Yid? Here's a long discussion. Let's see. So now, Messiah Ale, what it says here in this brayso that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Eiv, this is proof l'Rab Levi bar Lachma. The Amar Rab Levi bar Lachma. Rab Levi bar Lachma said, Eiv b'mei Moshe. Eiv was an individual that lived in the time of Moshe, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu is writing the story of the life of Eiv that lived in his times. How do we know that he lived in the times of Moshe? Because Ksiv Hacha, here there's one pasuk that says that Eiv said, Mi yiten eifai v'yichtavun milai. Who is going to give that it should be? How will it be that my words will be inscribed? So it uses the term eifai. Uksiv Hasam, and by Moshe Rabbeinu it also says, Ubameh yivada eifai. How will this be known? So it uses the term eifai as well. So we compare. We learn out from this that he was in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Gemara, if that's the source, because it uses the term eifai in Eiv and the eifai by Moshe Rabbeinu, the term eifai is written in Chumash regarding other people as well. I could say b'mei Yitzchak, that Eiv lived in the time of Yitzchak. T'chsiv mi eifai hu atzot tzayid. Yitzchak, it also says the term eifai. Or b'mei Yaakov, maybe he lived in the time of Yaakov, where it says t'chsiv im kein eifai zoisasu. Or b'mei Yosef, maybe in the time of Yosef, t'chsiv eifai heim rayim. It also uses the term eifai. So how do you know to compare Eiv to the eifai that it says by Moshe Dafka? And says the Gemara loisal kedaitach. It doesn't make sense to compare to the eifai that it says by the other by Yitzchak, Yaakov, or Yosef, but it's only to what it says by Moshe, because the chsiv, the pasuk that we quoted before, it continues there and it says that by Eiv, the pasuk, the lashon of eifai, it says there mi yitin b'sefer v'yuchoku. Who will give that my words will be inscribed in the sefer? And that's where the pasuk uses the term eifai. U'Moshe hu de'ikri mechaykek. So he uses the term v'yichaku, that it will be inscribed. And therefore that we find regarding Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was called the mechaykek, the one that inscribed and wrote down the halachas and the psukim of Torah. T'chsev vayar reishis loy kisham mechalkas mechaykek safon. Referring to the place where Moshe Rabbeinu was buried, Moshe Rabbeinu is referred to as Chelkas Mechaykek, the place of the Mechaykek, the one that inscribed the halachas. And therefore we know that Eiv, where it says a similar lashon of Eifai and Chakuk, was in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Rava says Eiv b'mei miraglim hoya. Eiv was in the times of the miraglim. How do we know? Because Ksivacha, the pasuk says regarding who Eiv was, Ish hoya be'eretz utz in Eiv Shemai. Beginning of Eiv, it says who was Eiv? He was in Eretz Utz, and his name is Eiv. So it uses this expression that he was in Eretz Utz. Uksiv Hasam, by the Meraglim, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu asks them, Ha'yesh ba eitz. He says they should see whether there's a eitz, whether there's a tree in Eretz Yisrael. What does this mean? What is he asking them to know if there's a eitz, a tree in Eretz Yisrael? So this eitz that Moshe Rabbeinu asks the Meraglim about is the Eiv, which is in Eretz Utz. The Gemara, how are you comparing the two? Midami, Hacha Utz. By Eiv it says Utz, and Hasam Eitz. And by the Meraglim it says Eitz. But the Gemara answers, no, it's still the same thing. Hachi Kamalu Moshe Yisrael. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu tells Yidden. Yashnoi la'oisei Adam. There is this individual, Sheshneisav Aruchais Ke'etz, that his lifetime is as long as the life of a tree. Umegan al Deire Ke'etz. And he also protects his generation like a tree that shields people under it. And Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to know whether Eiv is still alive and he's protecting the people in Eretz Yisrael. That's the connection of Eiv and what Moshe Rabbeinu was asking the Meraglim about. So we see that it was in the time of the Meraglim. There was one of the Rabbana that was sitting in front of Rav Shmuel ben Achmeni, and he sat and said as follows: this personality Eiv, with the whole story that it says about him, he never was created. The whole Sefer of Eiv is all just a mashal of a person that in the beginning had a beautiful, great life, and then later he had tremendous tzaras, and then later on the Eibusha gave him back a good life. The whole story of Eiv is all just a mashal. Amalei, so Shmuel ben Achmeni responded and said, Alecha omakra, regarding what you're saying, the pasuk comes and clarifies and clearly says, no, ish hoya be'eretz utz Eiv shmai. That he was. The pasuk begins and says, no, he actually lived. So the Gemara says, if that's your whole proof, because it uses the term hoya, that he lived, he existed, so if so, me'ata is another pasuk which is clearly just used as a mashal. V'larasha in koil, the one that's poor has nothing, kim kifsa achas ketana, he only has one lamb, ashakana, that he buys for himself, v'yichya v'gayme, and he lives. Mi have, what it says in that pasuk, did it actually come to be? Is that pasuk talking about something that actually happened? The pasuk there continues, The main the raya, as Rashi says, is from the conclusion of that pasuk, and it says vatihi loy kabas, that it was for him like a daughter. So it also uses the term vatihi, and it was. Are you going to say, just like over here, it uses the term hoya, so it means that Eov lived and he actually existed, so there as well, when it says the term vatihi, it means that it actually was. So over there, mashal ba'alma. Over there, it's clear. That pasuk is clear that it's only being used as a mashal. So hachanami mashal ba'alma here as well. Even though it says that Eov lived, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he lived. It's just a mashal. But the Gemara responds, no, it's not the same. Here, it's not just saying that Ish Hoya, there was a person by the name of Eov, but it spells out that where he lived and what his name was and what the name of his city was. It's saying all these details to let you know that there was a person by the name of Eov. It's a real story. Another opinion regarding when exactly Eov was, a completely different opinion. Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Elazar, the Amri Tarvayu, they both said that Eov was much later. Eov me'oile goyle hoya. Eov was in the time period when Yidden came up from Galus Bavel to the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Ubeis medrashe b'Tverya hoya, and he had a Beis Medrash in the city of Tverya. Okay, so we have different opinions when Eov was, either in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu or in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. Meisvei, but the Gemara asks on this. It says in the Braise, Yemei Shneisav Shel Eov, the lifetime of Eov, when did he live? Misha Shenichnesu Yisrael L'Mitzrayim Vache Yotzu, from the time when Yidden came down to Mitzrayim until they came out of Mitzrayim. In that time period, when Yidden were in Mitzrayim, that's when Eov lived. So how can we say that Eov was later, the times in the Meraglim, or later on than the time when the second Beis Hamikdash, and when he was in Tverya? That says the Gemara, that Braisa is not actually saying the time period when he lived. Rather, Ema Kim Misha Shenichnesu Yisrael L'Mitzrayim Vat Shosha Yotzu. It's actually coming to say how long he lived. And he's saying, how long did Eov live? As long as Yidden were in Mitzrayim, which is 210 years. And Rashi says it actually fits with what it says in the Pasuk, because there in the Pasuk it says that after Eov went through all of his tzaddis, the Eibishter doubled his life. And in the beginning it says that he lived for 70 years. And then the Eibishter gave him another lifetime, double of what he lived before. That means that the Eibishter gave him another 140 years. So if he lived first 70 years and then another 140 years, that means he lived a total of 210 years, like the amount of time that Eden were in Mitzrayim. Meisvei, the Gemara asks another question about Eov, based on what we said before. So Eov was a Yid, and even according to what Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Elazar said, Eov had a Beis Medrash in Tverya, in the time when they came up from Galus Bavel. So the question is, in a Braisa it says, Shiva Nevi'im Nisnabu Lumisaylam. There was 10 prophets that prophesied for the nations of the world. And Ve'elohim Bilam, Ba'aviv, Bilam and his father, and Ve'eov, and Eov was one of them. So here we see Eov was a Goyish prophet. Eliphaz HaTemani, Ubeldad Ashuchi, V'Tsefer HaNamasi, and Ve'eliu ben Brachiel Habuzi. So we see here that he's counted.
7.
Huh? 7. What did I say? 10. Sorry. So the 7, we see over here that we're counting 7 different prophets amongst the nations of the world. So Eov wasn't Bechlal Yid. How could you say that he had a Beis Medrash in Tverya? So the Gemara answers, according to your reasoning that you're proving from what it says in this Braisa, one of them that it mentions over here is Eliu ben Brachel. Now, who was he? Lav Misrael Lav. You can see from his name who he was that he was a Yid. So if we're counting him as a Yid, so then Eov could have also been a Yid. And v'hoksiv, it says about Eliyahu ben Berachel, mimishpachas Ram, that he was from the family of Ram. Who's the family of Ram? It's shortening the name of Avraham, meaning that he was a descendant of Avram. He was a Yid. So what is this Braisa saying? It's not counting the Nevi'im that they were Goyim. Elo in invi le'umes ha'olam. We're counting over here individuals that said prophecy for the nations of the world, which Bilam was a guy, and he said prophecy for the nations of the world. But then there was other personalities here. This Eliyahu ben Berachel, he was a Navi, he was a Yid, but his prophecy was things that mattered for Goyim. So we could say the same thing regarding Eov. Eov was a Yid, and he said prophecy regarding the nations of the world. If that's the case, then why are we counting only these 7? Atu kula nevi, the other prophets that we know, did they not say prophecy regarding things of the nations of the world? So it's not only these 7. And so the Gemara knows a difference. Hasam ikin nevi Yisrael liyisrael. Regarding all the other neviim, their main prophecy was regarding Yidden. Hacha ikin nevi Yisrael. These 7, their prophecy was primarily lo Messiah, to matters that relate to the nations of the world. So the Gemara says we can still say that Eov was a Yid, like mentioned before. The Gemara asks so from a different brayse where it says clearly, Meisvei, the brayse says, Chosid hoya b'misaylam. There was a pious individual amongst the nations of the world. It says very clearly. And the Eov Shemai. And his name was Eov. He only came into the world to get the schar that he has here in this world. And Hevi HaKadosh Baruch Hu all of Yisurim. And then the Eibusha brought upon him suffering, pain and suffering. And Hischil Mecharef u'Megadef. And then he began to blaspheme and to speak out against the Eibusha. So Kafaleh HaKadosh Baruch Hu schare b'olam hazeh. So the Eibusha gave him then afterwards a double reward here in this world. Kedei l'tardei min olam haba. In order that in Olam Haba he will be expelled, he won't get Olam Haba because he got all of his reward here in this world. So here it clearly says in this brayse that the Eov was a chassid of Umas HaOlam in this world. So the Gemara answers and says Tanoihi. We must say that it's a machlokes Tanoim regarding who Eov was. Tanya, because in another brayse we learned Rabbi Lazar said that Eov, when was the time that Eov lived? They're also arguing different than what we said before. He lived in Mei Shveit HaShoftim, in the times of the judges, which was after Yeshua came, the time period of the Shoftim. That's the time when Eov lived. Shenemar, how do we know this? Because the pasuk says, Hein atem kulchem chazisem. All of you are gazing and are looking. V'lo mezeh hevel tavol. Why are you involved in vanity? Which generation is this? What's a generation that was all vanity? This is the generation of the Shoftim, as the Gemara is soon going to bring. This was a generation that even the Shoftim themselves, the judges themselves, were not behaving properly. Rab Shua ben Karcha says, yet another opinion when Eov lived, Eov was in the time of Achashverosh. Shenema, because in Eov it says, there were no beautiful women like the daughters of Eov in the whole entire land. Now that's so it speaks about the beautiful women in his time in all the land. What was the time period where we see in another place a pasuk where they were looking for a beautiful woman? That's Achashverosh that was looking for a new queen. So that's the comparison that we learned, that's the time period that Eov lived. There's another time period where we find this expression in the pasuk. They were looking for a beautiful mate for David HaMelech. So maybe that's the Nara Yafa that is connected to the time when Eov lived. And says the Gemara, Hassan v'chol gvul Yisrael. In the time of David HaMelech, that was only within the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Hacha b'chol haaretz. Over here by Eov it says Nashim Yafes kibnois Eov b'chol haaretz, and that's in the time of Achashverosh outside of Eretz Yisrael. Another opinion, Rab Nassan Naimer, Eov b'mei Malchus Shavahaya. Eov lived in the time of the queen of Shava. Shenema, the pasuk says, Vatipol Shva Vatikachim. Shva pounded on them or attacked them and took them. So this says in Eov, and so we see that it was in the time of Eov. Eov b'mei Kastim Haya. Eov was in the times of the Kastim. Shenema Kastim. The pasuk over there is that Kastim Samu Shloisha Rashim. And so also that we see that there was in the time of the Kastim. And so it says both of these things in the pasuk over here, but the question is which time period he was in. So that's another two opinions here about this. There's yet another opinion, Eov Yaakov Hoya, that Eov actually lived in the time of Yaakov Avinu, and not only that, Vidina Bas Yaakov Nasa. He married Dinah, the daughter of Yaakov. How do we know this? Because Ksiv Hacha, it says here in Eov, Kedavar Achas Hanevalois, that Kedaber, that is. Kedaber Achas Hanevalois Tedabri. You speak inappropriately. Ksiv Hassam, and it says over there regarding Dinah, the story that happened with her in Shechem, Kinevala Asa B'Yisrael, that something inappropriate happened amongst Eden. So, or amongst the children of Yaakov Avinu. So from that we learn out a comparison of the expressions that Eov lived in the time of Yaakov and he married his daughter Dinah. So what do we see over here? So now the Gemara concludes the inyan of what it started off with, that it's a machlokes Tanoim whether Eov was a Yid or Eov was from Umm whether he was a guy. So the Gemara concludes and says, based on the different opinions we had here in this brayse, V'kolo hani Tanoi sviriluhu the Eov mi Yisrael hava. All of these opinions here are that Eov was a Yid. Lebar mi yesh oimrim. Besides the yesh oimrim in the brayse that says that Eov was in the time of Yaakov. The Isal Kedaitach Miyum Misailam have because, or sorry, actually, the Yesh Emrim is the opinion that says that Eov was later, afterwards. As the Gemara explains, because the Isal Kedaitach Miyum Misailam have, if you're going to say that Eov was from the nations, he was a guy, Basal the Shach of Moshe, after Moshe passed away, Mi Sharye Shchina al Evdei Kechavim, did the Shchina dwell amongst the Goyim, that there was a prophet amongst them? But V'ha'om Amar, the Master already said about prophecy, that there was amongst Goyim, that this was not after the time period of Moshe Rabbeinu, because Bikesh Moshe Shlei Tishra Shchina al Evdei Kechavim. Moshe Rabbeinu davened and asked Hashem that the Shchina should not dwell on the Goyim, and V'nasanle, and the Eibishter gave him his request. Shanema, as it says, that Moshe Rabbeinu davens and says, V'niflinu, that Yidden should be separated, and Ani v'amcha, me and my people should be different, and this refers to the fact that there should be no nevuah amongst the Goyim. So therefore, the opinion that says, second. Yeah, so okay, let me just explain this again. That all the opinions that say before that Eov was after the time period of Moshe, I said it right before. All the opinions that says that Eov was after the time of Moshe, it must be that he was a Yid, because Eov was a prophet. And it says, so it says that he was counted before amongst 7 prophets. So after Moshe Rabbeinu, it must be that he was a Yid, because there was no prophecy amongst Goyim that possible. Mashenk and all the Yeshayim that says that he was in the times of Yaakov Avinu. If he was in the time of Yaakov Avinu, so then he was a guy. There was no who were the Yidden then? Only Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and their descendants. But anybody else was a guy. So therefore, it's that opinion that says that Eov was a guy. The Gemara says weiter, Omer Rab Yechanan, Abar Eov, Deirei Shel Eov, the generation of Eov, Shotov Bezima Hoyu. They were very deeply involved in immorality. Shenema, the Pasuk says, as quoted before, Hein atem kulchem chazisem, you all are gazing and looking inappropriately. And lo mezeh hevel tavalo, why you are involved in vanity. Uksiv, another Pasuk says, Shuvi ashulamis, return the shulamis, which refers to Yidden, Shuvi v'nechzebach. This v'nechzebach means that the Yidden would then in that time period gaze and look around in areas and women that are not immodest and in vanity, in immorality. So the Gemara asks, how do you know that's what the term v'nechzebach means in the negative? Eime b'nevuah, maybe the term v'nechze actually means in the positive, it's an expression of prophecy. Tichsiv, as the Pasuk says, Yeshayahu ben Amos, Chazayin Yeshayahu ben Amos. We see the term of Chazayin is a term that's used by Yeshaya as a nevuah. So maybe here as well, it means a union of nevuah, that Yidden are seeing and positive and revelation. In case, the Gemara answers it can't be no. Because if so, Lama Zeh Hevel Tavalu Lomali. So when it says over here that why are you involved in vanity, so obviously it's talking about something which is negative. So that shows that was a time period of Eov when the Yidden were involved in Zima. Going back to what was mentioned before regarding the time period of the Shoftim, what does it mean when it says the times when the judges judged? What does this mean? This means that the judges themselves were being judged. It was a generation that the people were judging the judges. That is, if you say that the judges came and said to a person, should be take out a splinter from between your teeth. In other words, someone points out some small aveda that you did, you turn back to him and you say, take this big pillar from between your own eyes, meaning that the Shoftim couldn't tell Yidden anything what to do because you turn right back to him and say that you're also imperfect and even more than me. If the shofet, if the judge tells you that your money, your silver becomes sigim, will be, how do you translate sigim over there?
Dross.
Will become dross or whatever, will become rusted, or become ruined. So you say back to him that that your wine is diluted by water. And the same point that the Shoftim couldn't lead Yidden because they themselves were corrupt. It was mentioned before regarding Malka Shva. Anybody that says that Malka Shva was a queen and the Malkas means that she was a queen, is making a mistake, because my Malkas Shva, when it says Malkas Shva, doesn't mean the queen Shva. Actually, it means Malchusa, the Shva, it means the kingdom of Shva. The Mashai actually says that Gemara doesn't mean literally, because if you look there in the pasuk when it says the term of Malkas Shva, it's not only this one word that it says Malkas Shva. It's all the expressions that it says about Shva are all lashon nekeva. So how can we say that she was a king? So he says what the Gemara means to say is that anybody that makes the mistake to say that she was only the king, but there was another king that was the main ruler, is making the mistake. She was the queen, but she was also the main ruler. That's what the Gemara is clarifying. It was her kingdom. Vahi v'hayayim was the day. Vayavoyu b'nei ha'alakim l'syatzav al Hashem. And see, it's another pasuk that relates to Eve. So it says that the Bnei Elokim, which refers to the Malachim, that came in front of the Eibishter, and Vayave gam Satan b'seicham, the Satan also comes in front of Hashem. Vayem Hashem al Satan, the Eibishter says to the Satan, Ma'ayin Taveh, from where do you come? Vayan Satan, and the Satan responds and says, the pasuk continues there, Moshed ba'aretz Misalach ba, I'm going around in the world and I'm looking around in the world. So what does the Satan tell the Eibishter? The Satan tells the Eibishter, Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, Shatati b'chol ha'olam kuloi, I flew around in the entire world, V'leimatzasi nemon ka'avdecha Avram, and I didn't find anybody that was faithful to you like your servant Avram. Shamar toloi, you said to Avram Avinu, Kom misalech ba'aretz, get up and go in the land, la'arko la'rachba, to its length and width, Kilchat, then I'll give you this land. The Eibishter promises him, Eretz Yisrael will be his. And what happens? Nevertheless, when Sarah passes away and he can't find a place where to bury her, and he's forced to buy a burial plot for 400 shekel kesef, so Avram Avinu could have had complaints. Eibishter promises me this entire land, and I have to pay this to bury my wife. He didn't have any thoughts to think against Hashem. Then it says there further in the pasuk, Vayem Hashem ala Satan. Eibishter says to the Satan, you fly around in the entire world. Hasamta libcha el avdi Iyov. Did you pay attention to my servant Iyov? Ki ein kamayu b'haaretz v'gaymer. There's nobody in the land like Iyov. The Gemara here says that based on this pasuk, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Godel hanema be'Iyov. It's greater. The description that it says about who Iyov was, Yaiser mimashenem b'Avram, more than what it says by Avram. Dilo b'Avram ksiv, regarding Avram, the pasuk says Kiati yadaiti kirei elikim ata. So that's the description of Avram, Yirei elikim. But Rabbi Iyov ksiv, regarding Iyov, it says Ishtam, a man that was a tam, v'yashar Yirei elikim, and v'sar mira. So it says much more and greater things, the descriptions about Iyov. My Visar Mira, what does it mean when it says about Iyov, the literal translation, Visar Mira, that he turns away from bad? Bava Basra says, Iyov vatram b'mamayna hoya. Iyov forgoed on his money. Because minhage shalaylam, the way people behave in the world is, Neisim chatzi pruta lechenveni. If you have someone that did a little job for you, and you owe him just a half a pruta, so how are you going to pay him? So you buy something in the store, and you that's worth a pruta, and then you give half of it to this person that worked for you. So you pay him only that half a pruta. But Iyov vitra mishaloi. But Iyov gave up his part. Iyov, if he owed someone a half a pruta, so he gave him a full pruta. Vayana Satan as Hashem. So the Satan answers the Eibishter and says, and says, Hachinam yirei Iyov elikim. You think it's for nothing that Iyov is so God-fearing and Iyov is such a tzaddik? You gave him, you protect him and his family. So basically the Satan is saying to the Eibishter, because of all the good that you give Iyov, so of course he's going to be a faithful servant to you. So now this is a continuation of the pasuk. It says that the Eibishter benches him. My se yodov berachta. The pasuk there says that the work of his hands you bench. What does this mean? Omer Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak kol hanotel pruta me'Iyov. Anybody that took a pruta from Iyov, misbarach, would get benched. That was the power, the bracha that the Eibishter gave Iyov. And then there the pasuk also continues, "Mai umikneu poratz ba'aretz," and his cattle were plenty, was unusual fashion here in the world. The cattle of Iyov, they broke the boundaries of the world. The nature of the world is wolves come and attack and kill the goats. But by the cattle of Iyov, his goats kill the wolves that were attacking them. So now here's this continuation of what the Satan tells the Eibishter what he should do to Iyov. Send out your hand, touch everything that's his. In other words, take away everything that's his. Let's see what will be the result if you will the opposite of yivarecha. What will be Iyov's reaction? The Eibishter tells the Satan, everything that's his, I give it over to your hands. But him, Iyov himself, don't touch. So here the Gemara continues the story of what happened to Eov. So it was a day where his children were sitting and eating and drinking wine in the house of the brothers, the oldest brother. A malach comes to Eov and tells him that the cattle are plowing in the field, and the pasuk continues and says, and the asainis, which is the she camels, not camels, sorry, donkeys. And they were there. They were grazing there. What is the pasuk saying here? What is this malach saying to Eov? So this is actually saying of how good things were going for Eov. What this pasuk is saying is the goodness that Eov had in his life was so great that he tasted me'en olam haba. Similar to what it's going to be in the times of when Mashiach comes. Rashi brings, it says, when Mashiach comes, hara v'yeledes yachdav, that pregnancy and birth will be all together one on the same day. And similar here, it's saying regarding Eov that they were plowing in the field and planting, and immediately the asainis were bringing and carrying what grew right away. This was the peak of the goodness of the life of Eov. But then after this, the Gemara will continue the story what happened with Eov, that then afterwards Abraham allowed the Satan to take everything away from him. We'll see Mitzvah Shem.